live close by to Nuremberg, and Nuremberg was absolutely flattened during the war. So when you walk through it and you see all these old buildings and stuff, I'm always like, yeah, but that's not really that same old building that was, that was there before. But at the same time, it is also incredible because they did rebuild these things pretty well. So
So
it's
they
a bit of
rebuilt
both.
stuff so it looks the same.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
like
crazy.
in Berlin. Yeah,
Well, but I don't think they totally did in Berlin, because in Berlin, I feel like I do feel like there is like the west side of the city, and then there's like the east side of the city is architecturally, and there's some like old buildings that are from before the 20th century. But then I have some friends who are from former Soviet Union, and they go, "Yeah, I walk around some parts of Berlin, and I feel like I'm back in my
yeah,
like it's the architecture I grew up with."
right.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think the east part of the city has some of that, like the walls are very flat. And
Yeah. And I remember walking around Berlin, and we were with a city guide, and she also was saying there's bullet holes from World War II in this building still. And then you look over there, and it's like there's actually bullet holes in the building. And you're like, wow, that's amazing. They should fix that probably, but
yeah.
interesting.
Well, I think in like the middle of the city, in Mitte, which is by like the old museums, they actually specifically kept the bullet holes so that like you could
Yeah,
see them. But I took
yeah,
a walk in a neighborhood. I took a walk through a cemetery, just like
yeah,
it was like Easter, and we wanted to take a walk, so we walked through a cemetery. But we're walking through the cemetery, and it's in Kreutzburg, and we saw bullet marks on the gravestones, and I'm like, there was fighting going on in a cemetery. I was like,
yeah. Why? Although that's pretty practical to have
yeah.
the defeated ones right there in the cemetery, but that's pretty wild. Yeah,
But that definitely felt like out of a movie, just the like gravestones and then having the little marks on it and being like, oh, right. This
yeah, yeah.
happens here. Yeah. Do you feel like do you have interest in like the history of Germany as
Oh yeah, I do. I do. I don't. I know very little about it because in South Africa, it's not something we were exactly taught in school about
Mhm.
Europe. We learned a bit about the World War II and the Cold War afterwards, but we didn't. We didn't really learn that much, and that's why it is so fascinating for me when I do go to Berlin, because they've got amazing museums there. They've got amazing things there, and then also here in Nuremberg is where they used to hold the World War II rallies, the Nazi rallies. It
Yeah.
was it was quite a big center for the Nazi
Mhm.
regime,
Mhm.
and they've got a lot of things in the city archive and things. So it's for me, it's fascinating learning about the history of Germany, because even if you go further back like that to the other Reichs, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. And actually, the very first time when I like thought about Berlin, not when I came here for a job. It was that when I was in high school, I had to do a history report. When I was 15, I learned a whole year of European history, and then I picked the Berlin airlift as my
Right.
10-page paper. And so I wrote this whole like paper about like what the Berlin airlift was, which
Yeah.
I'm probably also going to mess up what it was, but it was like when the city was blockaded, when like the Allied forces were deciding how to like divide Berlin. There were like the four people. So it was like the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States. And they kind of like were like, how are we going to split up Berlin? It's in the
Yeah.
east, but it's also like the capital city. And then there was this whole planes flying food in for over a year. And
Yeah.
then when I was here in 2016, I walked to the airport where this
Ah,
whole
cool.
thing happened. And that
Yeah.
was super satisfying because
That's amazing.
it was like 9 years after I'd written this paper. And I was like, I
Yeah.
finally get to see it.
I'm seeing it. It's like amazing. Yeah, that is pretty cool. And that is one of my favorite stories, actually, that the whole airlift, because especially in the beginning, to get it to the logistical things that they had to overcome to be able to deliver the supplies was incredible. So it's an amazing story.
Yeah. And it was like,
Yeah.
it was so much commitment to just be
Yeah.
flying stuff in for over a year. Like,
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And if you start looking at things like there's a museum near Checkpoint Charlie, I think, with some stories about people who escaped the East and the ways that they did it, all the different ways that they went through the wall or over the wall in hot air balloons and stuff. It's mind blowing.
Yeah. I've heard two funny stories about that time because
Yeah.
my boyfriend was born. He was born in West Berlin the day the wall came down. And
Yeah.
he said that like when his dad was younger, his dad would like they would like because the people in West Berlin could go over to East Berlin. So they would and the beer was cheaper on the east. So what they would do is they would drive into East Berlin and they would like go party and then they could come back into West Berlin to go sleep because but so that was like the thing is because you know it's like oh it's cheaper beer over there so that's where they
Yeah.
and then the other one is I had heard that someone tried to go from the East Berlin to the West Berlin and what they did is they made a fake swan
Okay.
and there's a canal that runs through the city and so what they did is they got in the water with the swan like thing and then they swam but
with it on like over their head.
over their head.
The swan over their head.
Yes. And so they're swimming, and then they know that people are watching the river, right? Because otherwise people would just swim. So they didn't want to get caught. So what they did is they spent the night sleeping with a herd of swans on the water so that they would be believable. And then waited, and then the next morning kept swimming. And they made it over to the west. They're like,
holy crap.
Yeah.
That's dedication as well.
Yeah.
To sleep with a bunch of swans on the river so that you don't get suspected.
It would be so cold all night with your feet in the water.
I can't. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. What these people did to get that freedom is just incredible because they were so desperate to make it for people, family on the other side, or just to be free.
Yeah.
So those stories. That's why those stories are always interesting and amazing. And this is not so long ago. This is pretty recent stuff. So that's what's also interesting about it.
Yeah, not long ago at all.